Welcome to the sleep paralysis tapes. Settle into the dark, pull the covers close, and let the heavy silence fill your room. Tonight, we descend into chilling tales of the unexplained. Before the screen fades to pitch black, I invite you to become part of this archive. If you have your own terrifying encounters, please contact me and I will narrate your story in a future tape. If these shadows bring you comfort, please like, subscribe, and tap the bell. Now, close your eyes. Do not look at the foot of your bed. Just listen and let us begin. The job of an archivist is to make the past make sense, to take the mess of a life and turn it into something orderly, something you can put in a folder with a label. Eliza Vance was very good at her job. She worked at the Molten Fools Historical Society in a back room that smelled of old paper and dust. Her world was one of careful handwriting, acid-free boxes, and the soft click of a keyboard late in the afternoon. It was a quiet world. A safe one. The donation came from the estate of Harold Meacham, a local photographer. When he died, his nephew boxed up everything from his dark room and dropped it off. Mostly, it was exactly what you'd expect. Slides of the annual loggers' picnic, landscapes of the Cowlitz River under flat gray skies, proof sheets from the 1978 Fall Festival Parade. It was mundane, boring, and perfect. Eliza spent a Tuesday morning sorting through it all. She wore white cotton gloves. The only sounds were the shuffle of cardboard and the hum of the dehumidifier. She'd just finished numbering a series of a ribbon-cutting ceremony when she saw the box. It was a standard archive box, like all the others. But someone had written on the side in black marker, 3 words, personal, do not catalog. Now, a reasonable person would have stopped there. They would have respected the label. But an archivist's whole purpose is to catalog, to know. That label wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. Eliza lifted the lid. Inside, there were no slides or negatives, just photographs. Prints, 47 of them, stacked neatly. They were Kodak color prints, the kind you get back from a drugstore. These were from the 70s and 80s. The paper should have been fading. The colors should have shifted to a sickly orange. They weren't. They were pristine, as if they'd been developed yesterday. She lifted the first one to the light. It showed a kitchen. A late 70s kitchen with yellow laminate counters and a clock shaped like a sunflower on the wall. A man and a woman were sitting at a table. They were mid-meal. The woman was laughing, her hand halfway to her mouth. The man was smiling back. It was a private, warm moment. The next photo was of a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, asleep in a canopy bed. A nightlight shaped like a strawberry cast a soft pink glow on her face. The next showed the same couple, but not smiling now. They were in a living room. The man had his back turned, the woman's arms were crossed. Her mouth was open, caught in mid-argument. You could almost hear the silence in that room. Photo after photo, all of them inside the same house. A family doing ordinary things. Eating breakfast, watching television, a child building a block tower, a man reading a newspaper. But you need to understand something about photographs. They have a perspective, a point of view. These weren't taken from across a room at a family gathering. They weren't candid shots at a party. The angles were intimate, even claustrophobic. The photo of the couple arguing wasn't taken from the doorway. It was taken from beside the sofa, as if the photographer was standing right next to the bookshelf. The shot of the girl sleeping was taken from the foot of her bed, looking straight up the length of the blanket. These were the angles of someone who was already in the room. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Eliza put the photos down. She took off her gloves. The skin on her hands felt cold. The hum of the dehumidifier seemed louder now, more like a steady, mechanical breath. She looked at the box again. Personal. Do not catalog. 47 windows into a stranger's home, into their private, unguarded life. A life that, based on the clothes and the decor, had been lived decades ago. She should have put the lid back on. She should have sealed the box and written it off as a peculiar private collection. A mystery best left alone. But she didn't. She picked up the stack again and looked a little closer at the details. The pattern on the linoleum floor, the specific grain of the wooden trim, the style of the light switch by the hallway. She knew this town. She knew its old houses. And as she looked at that strawberry nightlight and that sunflower clock, a cold, slow recognition began to dawn in the back of her mind. She knew this house, and the family inside these pristine, impossible photos. They had all been dead for over 30 years. She put the photos down. Her hands were shaking. That dehumidifier wasn't humming anymore. It was thrumming, a low, steady pulse in the quiet room. Eliza Vance was a professional archivist. She dealt in facts. So she did what any good researcher would do. She began to dig. First, the house. She knew she'd seen that kitchen before. That particular shade of harvest gold. That faded checkerboard linoleum. It was the kind of detail you only remember if you've stood in a place for a long, quiet time. She left the Historical Society and walked to the county tax assessor's office. It was a short walk in the clean afternoon light, but she felt exposed, as if the windows of the old buildings were eyes, watching her carry this secret. At the assessor's, she pulled the plat maps for Elm Street. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she saw it. A small, black and white photo attached to a property record from 1985. It was a driveway shot of a modest one-story ranch house, 4117 Elm Street. She knew it. Of course she did. It had been for sale for years. The lawn was always just a little too long. The curtains were always drawn. It was a house that had simply stopped. The record listed the owners, Robert and Margaret Miller. A daughter, Chloe. They bought the place in 1974. She left the assessors and went to the library. The Moulton Falls Library smelled of wood polish and old books. It was a comforting smell. Or it used to be. The librarian, Mrs. the Ballion. Gable knew Eliza. She didn't ask questions when Eliza requested the microfilm for the local paper, The Sentinel, from November 1991. The machine whirred. The dates blurred by. And then she found it. A short article on page 6. Local family perishes in crash. Robert Miller, his wife Margaret, and their daughter Chloe, age 12, were killed when their station wagon left State Route 506 during a heavy rain. The accident happened on the night of November 8, 1991. No other vehicles were involved. All three were pronounced dead at the scene. Eliza sat back. The date was important. The newest photo in the box, the one of Chloe looking at a birthday card, a card for a 12th birthday, was dated October 1991 on the back, just a month before the crash. So the photos stopped when the family did. Now, a reasonable person might think that solves the mystery. A family album. A tragic end. But it didn't. It made it worse. Because Eliza had already checked the donor's portfolio. Harold Meacham. He was a landscape photographer. Trees, rivers, civic events. He had no children. He wasn't friends with the Millers. There was no reason for him to have 47 intimate, candid shots of this family. And more than that, the angles. She thought of the photo of Robert Miller shaving. The camera wasn't in the hallway. It was in the bathroom, behind his shoulder, looking at his reflection, as if the photographer was standing in the shower. She thought of the photo of Margaret Miller crying alone at the kitchen table late at night. The camera was at the other chair, at her eye level, as if someone was sitting with her. These weren't family snapshots. They were observations. They were the view of someone who lived in the walls, someone who was always there and was never seen. Who holds a camera while a mother cries? Who creeps to the foot of a child's bed to take a picture of her sleeping? The photos were pristine, professionally developed. Kodak paper, drugstore processing. Someone had taken these films to a shop. They had handed them to a clerk, waited a week, and picked them up. They'd paid for them. What did the clerk think developing these? A man's face, tight with anger, taken from 3 feet away in his own living room. A little girl's bath time, the steam on the lens. Maybe the clock didn't think anything. Maybe they just saw another roll of family pictures. That's the truly unsettling part. How the monstrous can look so ordinary when it's printed on glossy paper. Eliza left the library. The sun was going down. She didn't go back to the archive. She walked. Her feet carried her away from the town center, down the quieter streets, past houses with warm yellow windows, past the sounds of televisions and families eating dinner. She turned onto Elm Street. And there it was, number 47. It looked exactly like it did in the photos, and nothing like them. The siding was a little grayer. The roof had a few missing shingles. The little girl's window was just dark. The realtor's sign was still there, faded and crooked. She stood on the sidewalk across the street. She didn't cross. Not yet. She just looked at the house. And the house, with its blank, dark windows, looked back. Every detail from the photographs was there. The specific crack in the concrete walkway. The style of the mailbox. The way the gutter dipped near the front porch. This was the place. This was where a man had read his newspaper, where a woman had argued with her husband, where a child had built a tower of blocks, and someone had been in there with them, watching, preserving every mundane private second. A car drove by, its headlights sweeping over the empty lawn. For a second, the front window of the house flashed, reflecting the light. And in that flash, Eliza could have sworn she saw a shape. A dark silhouette, standing just behind the glass. Watching the street, watching her. The car passed, the window went dark again. It was just a trick of the light, a reflection of a tree. It had to be, but she couldn't unsee it, just like she couldn't unsee the photos. She knew she wouldn't sleep, not until she knew for sure. Not until she stood inside those rooms and measured the silence for herself. The archive had given her a question. The house, she was certain, held the answer. She just didn't know yet that some answers are worse than the questions. So much worse. She stood on the porch of 417 Elm Street. The key from the realtor's lockbox felt cold and heavy in her hand. It turned with a sound like cracking ice. The door swung inward. The air that met her wasn't just stale, it was still, as if the house had been holding its breath for 30 years. It smelled of dust and mildew. But underneath that, there was something else. A faint, sweet odor, like old perfume, or maybe the scent of a little girl's strawberry shampoo. It was a smell that should have faded. It hadn't. Eliza stepped inside, and the world from the photographs unfolded around her. It was all there, every detail. The wallpaper in the entryway was an exact match. She'd seen it in a photo of Chloe running down this hall. The light fixture above her was the same one casting a warm glow on Robert Miller's face as he read his paper. She walked slowly, her footsteps loud in the absolute quiet. Each room was a perfect, dusty diorama. The living room sofa was positioned exactly as it was in the argument photo. She could see the indentation where the coffee table had been. The bookshelf was empty now, but she knew its exact grain from the shot taken beside it. Then the kitchen. This is where it started to feel wrong. The silence wasn't empty here. It was watchful. The yellow counters were there, stained with rings from coffee mugs long gone. The sunflower clock was gone, but its outline was perfectly preserved in the faded paint. A ghost of a clock. She stood where Margaret Miller had sat crying late at night. The angle was precise. To take that photo, the observer would have been sitting in the other chair, right where Eliza was standing now. She moved down the hall to the bathroom. The mirror was spotted and silvered. She stood behind where Robert had shaved. In the photo, you could see the reflection of the shower curtain behind him. It had ducks on it. The curtain rod was still there, empty. But if she positioned herself just so, she could see the exact slice of the hallway in the mirror, the angle of the photographer standing in the bathtub. Her heart was a dull, steady thump in her ears. She pushed open the last door. Chloe's room. The canopy bed was gone. The room was bare. But the wallpaper with tiny pink roses was the same. The afternoon light fell in a weak rectangle on the floorboards. And that's when she saw it. In one of the photos, the one of Chloe building a block tower, there'd been a strange bare patch in the rug. A lighter spot on the dark wood underneath. Eliza had thought it was a flaw in the print. It wasn't. There, on the floor, in the exact spot, was a discoloration. A stain. It was dark, almost black, soaked deep into the grain. It wasn't from a rug. It was something else. Something that had seeped in and stayed. She knelt down. She didn't want to touch it. She just looked. And the full, crushing weight of it all landed on her. This wasn't a collection of happy memories. It wasn't a family album. It was a log. A meticulous, room by room, moment by moment log of observation. Someone had lived here with them. Not as a guest. Not as a friend. As part of the house. They had stood in the shower to capture a man shaving. They had sat at the kitchen table to document a woman's grief. They had knelt on this very floor to photograph a child at play. And all the while, the family had been utterly unaware. The photographs were a record of violation. A proof of presence. The observer hadn't just been watching. They had been curating, choosing which private moments to keep. Eliza stood up. The air felt thicker, colder. The sweet smell was stronger in here. She looked around the empty room. She imagined the flash going off, a quick, silent burst of light in the dark. Did Chloe ever stir? Did she ever sense a shape at the foot of her bed? The house seemed to lean in around her. The silence wasn't just absence, it was a held breath. It was the silence of a predator that doesn't need to make a sound. She had come for answers. But the house wasn't giving any. It was just showing her the stage. Letting her walk the same floors, feel the same oppressive stillness that the observer had felt. It was making her a part of the record. She needed to leave. No. This was a tomb, and she was disturbing things left in peace. But as she turned to go, her flashlight beam swept across the baseboard near the closet. And she saw something she hadn't noticed before. One of the wooden panels was slightly, almost imperceptibly, a different color. The line where it met the wall wasn't quite straight. It wasn't a panel. It was a door, small, no more than 18 inches high, a perfect square set into the wall. In all the photos of this room, the angle had never shown this part of the wall. The bed or the child had always been in the way. This was a part of the house the photos had never recorded. This, she knew with a cold certainty, was not for the family. This was for the one who watched. The floorboard was cold under her knees. The dust here was undisturbed. A fine gray powder. She stared at the small door in the wall. It wasn't locked. There was no handle, just a seam. A line you wouldn't see unless you were looking for it. Her fingers found the edge. She pushed. It swung inward, smooth and silent. Inside was a space about the size of a shoebox. Not for toys. Not for keepsakes. It was too shallow, too precise. And inside it was a single photograph. Not a Kodak print. Not a glossy rectangle from the drugstore. It was a Polaroid. The white border was thick and familiar. The kind you'd get from a one-step camera in the 90s. She picked it up. The image was crisp. Shockingly clear. It showed the Historical Society vault, the metal shelving unit, the specific, sickly green of the fluorescent light. And the subject was her. Eliza Vance. In her white cotton gloves, caught in a moment of discovery, her face a mixture of professional curiosity and dawning unease. She was holding the personal do not catalog box. The one she'd found 3 days ago. The timestamp on the Polaroid's border was smudged, but part of it was clear. It read, Navi 91. November 1991. The month the Miller family died. The photograph was cold in her hand. It wasn't dusty. It felt fresh. Her mind tried to run, to find a path. Harold Meacham died years ago. This photo was from the 90s. He could have taken it. He could have come back later. But why this? Why her? But that wasn't the path her mind took. It took the other one. The one that went back to the angles. The photo of her wasn't taken from the doorway. It wasn't taken from across the room. It was taken from beside the shelving unit. Close. Intimate. The perspective was of someone standing right next to her. Just like the photo of Robert Miller shaving. From behind him. In the bathroom. Just like the photo of Margaret Miller crying. From the other chair at the kitchen table. Just like the photo of Chloe sleeping. From the foot of the bed. This was the same observer. The same presence. The same violation. But this photo was dated November 1991. She found the box 3 days ago. The observer was in the vault with her before she ever opened the box, before she ever knew there was a house on Elm Street. The observer had been there, watching her discovery, logging her moment of unease. And then they had placed that log here, in this house, in this secret space behind a little girl's wall. For her to find. It was a closed loop, a circle with no beginning and no end. She had followed the evidence. The evidence had led her here, to this moment, to this photograph. And the photograph proved the observer had known she would follow it, had known she would kneel here, had known she would open this door. She was part of the record now. Her private moment of horror was just another entry in the log. Another Polaroid memory. The observer wasn't just documenting the Millers, they were documenting her. And they had started long before she ever began. She looked at the photograph again. Her own eyes, wide and unsure. The box in her hands. And she realized something else. The personal. Do not catalog. Box had come from Harold Meacham's estate. It had been donated. It had been sitting in the vault. But this Polaroid was not donated. This was placed here for her. So the observer wasn't Harold Meacham. The observer was someone else. Someone who knew Harold Meacham would die. Someone who knew his estate would be donated. Someone who knew an archivist named Eliza Vance would be working there on a Tuesday morning. Someone who had been watching all of them for decades, maybe longer. The house seemed to breathe around her. That sweet, faint smell grew stronger. Not strawberry shampoo, not perfume. It was the smell of developing chemicals. Of a dark room. The observer wasn't just a presence in the house. They were a photographer. A meticulous, patient, unseen photographer. And they had just taken her picture. She stood up. The Polaroid trembled in her hand. She had come for answers. She had found one. The answer was that there were no answers. Only the loop. Only the observation. Only the slow, patient documentation of a life until it ended. And her life was now part of that documentation. She had to get out. She had to leave this house. She had to burn this photograph. She had to forget this day. But as she turned to go, her foot brushed against something on the floor. Another photograph. It must have been tucked behind the Polaroid. It must have fallen out. She didn't want to look, but she did. It was another Kodak print from the original box, one she hadn't seen before. It showed the living room of this house, the sofa, the bookshelf, but the family wasn't in it. The photograph was empty, except for a shadow, a long, dark shadow cast across the carpet from the hallway, a shape that was vaguely human but wrong. The head was too elongated, the shoulders were too narrow. It was the shadow of the observer, standing in the hallway, watching the empty room. And in the corner of the photograph, in the same neat handwriting as all the others, was a date. October 31, 1991. Just a week before the Miller family died. Just a week before the observer's documentation would be complete. Eliza dropped the photographs. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. She ran. She ran out of the room, down the hall, through the kitchen, and out the front door. She didn't stop running until she was back on Main Street, back in the clean afternoon light. But the light didn't feel clean anymore. It felt exposed. It felt like a spotlight. She was part of the record now, and the record was always watching. She looked back at the house on Elm Street. The windows were still dark, blank, but she knew now. They weren't blank, they were lenses. And behind them was an eye that never blinked, an eye that had seen her, an eye that had seen the Millers, an eye that had seen everything. And it was still watching. The loop was closed, but it was still spinning, and she was trapped inside it. She didn't remember getting home. One moment she was running down Elm Street, the cold air burning her lungs. The next, she was fumbling with her own keys, her back pressed against her front door as if she could seal out the world. She'd left the little door open. She was sure of it. The Polaroid, the shadow photo, all of it was still there on that little girl's bedroom floor. She had to believe that, because the alternative was that she'd taken them with her. Her hands shook as she poured a glass of water. It tasted like dust. Light that house. She called Ben Carter, the director of the Historical Society, the next morning. Her voice was flat. She cited stress. She said she needed to leave immediately. He was confused, but he didn't fight her. He'd heard the tremor underneath her words. She boxed up the entire Meacham donation, every slide, every proof sheet. She included the personal box, the 47 windows. She didn't look at them again. She just sealed the lid. She drove it to the executor of the estate, a confused nephew in a tidy suburban split level. She handed it over without explanation. She felt lighter for about 10 seconds. Then the weight settled back, different and more diffuse. Because she realized, as she walked back to her car, that the Polaroid wasn't in that box. It was in her coat pocket. She must have picked it up. In her panic, her fingers had closed around it. She hadn't left it behind at all. She didn't take it out. She couldn't. She just drove home, the rectangle of it burning a hole against her thigh. This is where you think it ends, isn't it? She got rid of the photos. She quit her job. She moved on. But that's not how observation works. Once you know you're being watched, you can't unknow it. The gaze leaves a mark. Eliza started to notice cameras. Not just security cameras or a friend's phone. Every lens was a threat, the dark eye of a webcam on a laptop. The reflective surface of her microwave door. Mirrors became problems. She'd catch her own reflection and flinch, expecting to see someone standing just behind her, just outside the frame. It was an itch right between her shoulder blades. A constant crawling sensation of not being alone in her own home. She'd turn around quickly, certain she'd seen a shift in the light. She'd wake up, convinced she'd heard the soft, mechanical click of a shutter. She took the Polaroid from her coat pocket one afternoon. She held a lighter to its corner. The plastic curled and blackened, began to melt, and she stopped. She couldn't do it. Destroying it felt like an acknowledgement, a final step in a process she didn't understand. It felt like completing the record. So she hid it, between the pages of an old, dense textbook on her shelf, out of sight, but not gone. The house on Elm Street never sold. The realtor, a woman named Linda, mentioned it to Eliza once at the grocery store. She didn't know Eliza's connection, she just needed to talk about the weird one. It's a great price, Linda said. Good neighborhood. But everyone who tours it gets the same feeling. They say it feels occupied, like someone's already home. One couple said the air felt listening. Can you imagine? Eliza could imagine. She didn't say a word. She drove past sometimes. Not often, just enough. The realtor's sign grew more faded. The lawn got a little longer. The windows stayed dark. But they didn't look empty to her anymore. They looked like the lenses of a camera, hooded and patient. The house wasn't waiting for new occupants. It was a monument, a shrine to observation itself. The observer's gift wasn't the photos. It was the knowledge. The certain, cold knowledge that privacy is an illusion, that the most intimate moments of your life could be curated, collected, filed away in a box for some future archivist to find. And the loop never really closed, did it? She had followed the evidence to the house. The house had given her the Polaroid. The Polaroid proved she was always part of the story. So who took the picture of her? It's the question that doesn't have an answer, not one that makes sense. Maybe the observer was there in the vault in 1991, waiting for her. Maybe time isn't the straight line we think it is for them. Maybe for something that lives in the walls, past and present, or just different angles in the same room. Maybe Eliza Vance doesn't work with archives anymore. She works at a plant nursery, out in the open air, with things that grow and change in the light. She prefers it. There are no shadows there. But sometimes, when she's watering the ferns in the quiet of the greenhouse, she'll feel that old, familiar itch. She'll turn around slowly. And for a second, just a second, she'll see it. Not a person, not a shape, but a discrepancy in the light. A patch of shadow that seems a little too deep. A stillness that feels a little too deliberate. It's in those moments she understands the final, terrible truth. The observer was never after the Miller family, not really. They were just subjects, a practice run. The observer was after the act of seeing itself. The quiet, terrible power of watching a story unfold, knowing how it ends, and documenting every step anyway. And Eliza, she sees now. She sees everything. She sees the angles in every room she enters. She sees the potential for a photograph in every private moment. She has the observer's eyes. That's the real gift. She was brought into the loop and now she can't leave. So if you're listening to this in the dark maybe, with your own shadows stretching out around you, check your angles. Look at the corners of your room. Not just a glance, really look. Is there a space there? A gap between the dresser and the wall. A darkness under the bed that seems solid. That's where they stand. That's the point of view. And they've been there for a very, very long time. Patient, waiting, and always, always watching. The tape has reached its end. I hope the stories tonight brought a pleasant chill to your spine as you drifted further into the dark. Thank you for braving the shadows here at the Sleep Paralysis tapes. If you are still awake, lying still in the quiet, remember to contact me with your own unsettling encounters so they can be added to our growing archive. As my voice fades away, let the silence of your room wrap around you completely. May your sleep be undisturbed, your doors remain locked, and your morning arrive safely. Until we open the tapes again, good night.